City University Television presents the American Theater Wing Seminars. Working in the Theater. This seminar, production.
A very warm welcome to the American Theater Wing's Working in the Theater Seminars. Now in their 25th year, they are coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. These seminars offer a rare opportunity to explore with the panelists the realities of working in the theater. Today, we have the production seminar, and it is devoted to the Broadway show, The Civil War. We will follow the creation of the play from its inception through opening night and subsequent promotions that makes it possible for the show to be brought to the public. I'm Isabel Stevenson, chairwoman of the board of the American Theater Wing, and we hope that you will enjoy and learn from today's experience. But now, let me introduce our moderator for the seminar, President of the American Theater Wing, Roy A. Somlyo. Roy, would you please start this?
Thank you, Isabel. The idea that Isabel articulated is exactly, I think, what's most productive. We'll take the Civil War, we'll take it from its initial idea all the way through how it got onto the stage, its various workshops, its out-of-town tryout, through New York, and we'll learn how it's marketed and up to today's television commercial. And to do that, we have all the key people of the Civil War with us. On my far right is Pierre Cossette with producers. Pierre is a television producer who's now had, I guess, at least 3 shows on Broadway, starting with Will Rogers' Follies, Scarlet Pimpernel, and now the big hit Civil War. Next to him is Norman Zager. Norman is a marketing, public relations specialist. He does the press for the Civil War. On my right is Gary Gunnis. Gary is the executive vice president of Pace Theatricals. He's the executive producer, and he has all the day-to-day problems of getting a show on. Immediately to my left is Frank Wildhorn. Frank, in hockey terms, has done the hat trick. He has 3 shows currently running on Broadway, and he'll tell you more about them. But next to him is Jack Murphy, who is the lyricist of the Civil War, also a composer in his own right, and a frequent collaborator with Frank Wildhorn. And at the far end is Scott Zeiger. Scott is president of Pace Theatricals. He's acknowledged as the key expert at marketing. He's also extremely knowledgeable and an expert at taking shows on the road, because that's principally what Pace had done before they got deep into Broadway. So to find out what happened and how we got to Civil War, let's start at the very beginning, and I guess the genesis is with Frank Wildhorn, who was the original creator.
Okay, the Alley Theater in Houston, Texas is kind of a home away from home for me. I'm an associate artist there along with Edward Albee and Robert Wilson, and it was the birthplace of Jekyll and Hyde. In 1990, I wrote most of Scarlet Pimpernel while I was there, as well as a show called Svengali. And a couple of years ago was the 50th anniversary of the Alley Theater. And Gregory Boyd, who is the book writer and the collaborator with Jack and I on the Civil War, asked me if I would do a piece for the anniversary of the Alley Theater. And instead of a gothic or a sexy melodrama, we decided we would like to do something more Americana. And Greg is a Civil War buff, as is Jack. And the idea came, how about let's do something on the Civil War? But we didn't want to do Gone with the Wind or Shenandoah, kind of a fictional soap opera of the Civil War. We really wanted to do something that was more earthy, more real, more honest. And we started doing our research. And the letters and the diaries that we read of the people who lived during those years led us to our first major inspiration, which was that material. And if you read that stuff, it's more dramatic and more theatrical than any screenwriter can make up. So based on that, and a bunch of trips to battlefields, Gettysburg, Antietam, Vicksburg, we started writing. And out of it came a cycle of songs, and we used the material of the diaries and the letters to link the material together. And that's how the process really began. I like to try to be a little bit of a bridge between the music industry and the theater industry. So very early on in the process, Atlantic Records came on and committed to doing these recordings that we've had out now. And we brought together actors like James Garner and Danny Glover and Ellen Burstyn. Dr. Maya Angelou was the voice of slavery. And 30 acts from around the world, from Hootie and the Blowfish to Dr. John, from Trisha Yearwood to Amy Grant, Patti LaBelle, B.B. Winans. And the album was born.
Could I interrupt you just for a moment?
Sure.
At this point, did you have theatrical producers involved? Had Pierre or Scott, anybody else been involved?
Yes, very early on.
How did you work into this early process?
Well, Kathleen Raitt called me one day, and she said that she had a couple of projects that she thought I would be interested in. And I found out all about them, and they have been, you know, this is not an easy thing to bring in because it's so different. So it was shopped around, and I saw a golden opportunity. I read it and I heard the music. I said, this is terrific. And that's how I got into it, and I started doing readings and so on and so on and so on. And from Little Acorns grew, and then we were going to go on tour first, and then we did, and then the Alley. We went to the Alley first, and New Haven, and that's how I got involved, and I'm very proud of it.
When did Pace become involved?
Well, we're the producers of Jekyll and Hyde, so we've had a long collaborative, positive relationship with Frank Wildhorn and his music. And early in the process, as he was composing these tunes, Frank came to our office and sat down at the piano in our conference room and banged out a couple of anthems for Gary and myself, and we were immediately drawn to the material. And this was very early on in the Jekyll and Hyde process, too. It was just as the show was really getting going. And we hadn't given a lot of foresight to the next Wildhorn musical while we're still doing the first. We were absolutely drawn to the material, and I think at that time Pierre had already sort of gotten on board, or was prepared to get on board, and was in the process of planning the first staged reading, or workshop reading. And Gary and I stayed very close to the material. We were marketing and promoting and producing Jekyll and Hyde at the time, but we came to that first reading that Pierre had staged, and from that minute forward, we negotiated an equal collaborative part with Pierre and Frank as a producer. It was.
What is Pace? What is Pace?
What is Pace? Pace produces new intellectual properties on Broadway, such as Jekyll and Hyde. We were the lead producer of that, and The Who's Tommy several years back. We produce revivals on Broadway. We produce national touring companies that play throughout the United States. We operate Broadway subscription series in 38 markets in North America. We have some real estate interests both in the United States and in England. And we're part of a larger live entertainment company called SFX, which is a publicly traded company on NASDAQ, which does everything from rock concerts to motorsports events.
Now, Gary, you came into it. You came into the picture at the same time. Were you putting figures on paper at that point? Did anybody care about how much it was going to cost in these early stages?
We still don't.
Well, we always care what it's going to cost, of course, because this is commercial theater that we're doing. But I think the project grew organically. Frank had a very unique plan and picture in his mind of what this piece would be. And we spent a lot of time trying to avoid the money discussion so that it could take its own wing, become what it's going to become, and then find the way to produce it in a way that would be economical and conservative while still letting everything flower.
Well, who decided to do how the first production was going to happen at the Alley? Was that the first, or did you do workshops?
Pierre's workshops and readings were really the first productions under the auspices of a guy named Nick Corley. And then when we went to the Alley, it was more of a collaboration between Nick and Gregory Boyd with Jerry Zaks being kind of the consultant. And then when we left the Alley, Jerry then moved up and became the official director of the piece.
I think we should explain what workshops are. How do they work? And since they all work differently, how did your workshops go?
Well, I don't know if you'd characterize the Alley production as a workshop. We characterize it more as a regional theater development production because typically a workshop is a low-cost opportunity for the producers to see the show and the creators to see the show on its feet, typically in a black box or in a rehearsal room. The rehearsal room provided for Pierre the opportunity to do the readings, which were basically the music performed live. But the first fully realized production, where there was 2 acts, a beginning, a middle, and an end, was at the Alley Theater, and that was a fully realized production with set costumes, lights, and so forth. And that was really a negotiation between the Alley and the commercial producers, led by Gary Gunnis, to provide what we call enhancement money to the regional theater to give it the necessary funding that commercial producers such as ourselves can see the show in its full glory.
And the great thing about doing something like that is that over a period of weeks, 50,000 people get to see the show. And so you really get to gauge the audience and learn from the audience and communicate with the audience. And in fact, at the Alley, we would do 3 or 4 performances a week. We would do talkbacks and actually get their opinions and get their feedback.
Did you also already have the recordings out, the Atlantic recordings out?
The first recording had come out, yes, the Nashville sessions, yes.
Had come out before you even opened?
Which is what we did with Jekyll and Hyde as well.
Well, you seem to be establishing a formula which is highly successful, obviously, and it's kind of convenient that your day job, as it were, is at Atlantic.
Well, I believe very much it's great to have the people come out of the theater humming the tunes. I think it's better if they go in the theater humming the tunes. And the fact of the matter is that only the record business and their machinery can reach that many people that fast. And the fact that they can do that, those albums then become calling cards for the shows. Certainly, from a historical perspective, with Jekyll and Hyde, the songs This Is the Moment and Someone Like You, and the national and international exposure that they had over the years was a wonderful way to keep the music out in the consciousness of the people. And I thought that worked great. And thank God for Atlantic Records and the support that they've given us, that they are committed to doing this. And now we actually have a label, Time Warner. Atlantic Records is part of Time Warner, which is the largest communication company in the world. And our little label, Atlantic Theater, is their label dedicated to the promotion and encouragement of a new American theater works.
Well, I think one of the advantages is that you and Jack have written music that people can sing and recognize the second time they hear it, as opposed to some of the musicals which are being done, which don't have that same kind of people can't retain melodies to it.
Well, Roy, I'd be the first to tell you, I'm not sure if I'm a sophisticated theater goer. I'm more of a man of the people. And when I write something, I always feel if it moves me and I get excited by it, that it'll move most people. And that's kind of been just following the heart and the way to do it for me.
Well, I think it's probably the fundamental of the success of theater is that if you're dealing with something that, if you're honest about it, then I think people will be receptive to that.
I missed a beat. From the writing to the option to the production, how much time did that take? Can you give
from
me
their writing?
Early on.
When you said I started writing.
Well, when I saw this writing, it was not fully developed. It was practically developed, the idea, and there was some writing, and the songs had been completed, not all of them, but most of them.
Was that your house?
Yeah, at my house. And I saw this thing, and I'm very proud. I'm very, very, very proud of this show. And especially the fact that I was the first guy to write out a check and say, I want this. And that was started the choo-choo rolling.
Was that an option on the show?
Well, no, it was an option to
produce the show.
Yeah, to produce the show, and then you have to, when you do that, you have to put all the items together, the capitalization, and it starts going and going and going and going, and then now it's at the St. James Theater.
How long did that take?
Well, that took about 2 years, but it all starts, you have a wastebasket, a telephone, and a desk, and you go. Now, there's been 3 years before that of hard work and conceiving of this, which they did, writing, which they did, the lyrics, which they did, And it's a magnificent piece that I think will be around for many, many years. And 2 years for me, maybe 3 years for them. You add all that on, that's 5 years. And that's how much time it takes.
Norman, when did you start promoting the show?
I joined the show at the Alley Theater, saw the show in its last weeks there, and basically began work thereafter. Part of it was finding out where the show would go artistically, which is where the marketing and press all has to be integral to the show. You don't impose it, so it evolves up from the piece itself. So it was interesting to follow and work with Frank Wildhorn and Jerry Zaks and learn, Jack, where the show was going, so how to position it. What was it was our first challenge. How do we position this unique piece, because it is an unconventional book. It's not a traditional musical in that sense. It's a thematic musical. So our first effort was to get a handle on its theme, develop the press materials, and then begin and make sure that we were represented in season announcements, etc.
Well, there were a lot. Did it undergo many changes, Jack? Did you have a lot of rewrites, or?
Yeah. Yes, I did. The short answer.
New songs or new lyrics?
New songs, new lyrics. When Jerry Zaks, for example, became involved, he would look at the piece and he would point out things, and we were missing a beat here, we were duplicating a beat here, sort of to weed out the redundancies, to sort of contextualize things better, to set up things better. He would point us in that way and say, look, we need to contextualize the opening better. We don't understand what's happening. And once having been set down that path, you generally start looking at it yourself in those kind of terms, and so you start saying, oh, well, wait, and let me change this and let me change that. And the good news about it is that it's the theater is just such a collaborative effort that there's always an idea. The rate of ideas is always there. There's always someone to say, to prod, to poke, to urge, to,
in a positive sense.
In a very positive, yes, in a very positive sense. This was a very positive experience for me, at least. I mean, I think for everybody. It's a very positive experience because of that, because of everyone being interested in the work and not ancillary things.
Oh, I'm not so clear on exactly how it grew. The first production, first time it was on its feet, was at the Alley, and did you then subsequently do workshops? Or was the early readings was what we
had 3 or 4, I forget, early readings in which we brought,
What is this?
That's a lot of people. A lot of people. A lot of people with money. A lot of people with marketing expertise. Try to get everybody on board. And now, when we went to the Alley, Pace and Cosette, and we put money on top of what they paid us. And this is a nonprofit thing down there. And that's when it was in front of an audience, 900 people a night. We did it for 4 weeks. And that's where Jerry Zaks came in. The choo-choo really started rolling. Everybody was excited about this show. Then we booked New Haven for 4 weeks. Now, we had a road company down in Houston, but by the time we got to New Haven, we had a fully blown Broadway show because we moved right from New Haven right into Broadway. So we had that 4 weeks to learn and change and do, and that was it. Alley Theater in Houston, New Haven, and New York.
Well, that's not so. In others, that's almost the old-fashioned way of doing musicals.
It is.
Where you tried it out.
It is. When I had the Will Rogers Follies, I thought, well, what do you need break? Either the show works or it doesn't. And I found out that we'd have been much better off if we'd have taken a few weeks out of town.
Well, let's look at the elements, though. At what point did you orchestrate the show? Did you have full orchestrations in Houston?
We did. We had full orchestrations in Houston, but only for the size band that we had there, which was, I think, an 8 or 9 piece band.
And now
we have 14 at the St. James, and so it was re-orchestrated for Broadway.
There's always that moment. I know that everybody, the first time you hear the full orchestration, you had that happen to you, I guess, twice because you had it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Oh, it's a great
Remember
moment.
that day?
Yeah, sure.
Everybody, in every musical, I think everybody remembers the first time. I have a very fond memory. I'll impose. I know I was one of the producers of the last show that Richard Rodgers did, and I was sitting with him the first time you hear the music for I Remember Mama, and maybe he had some premonition that that was going to be his last show, but he just rose. It was just so beautiful to hear the work that he had created on the piano, as you do. Suddenly, here was a full-fleshed orchestra playing, and then we had 25 people in that orchestra. But that's the great moment, I think.
The first time we heard the orchestrations, Frank was there, and it was for the recording. And we had a lot of musicians. We had 35 musicians. And the downbeat came on the first number, and all you could see was teeth from Wildhorn. For the next 3 hours, it's just nothing but teeth. And everybody in the cast and the singers, you're so lifted by that. Because up until that time, you've had a little piano off in a corner somewhere, and that's it.
It's both from a marketing perspective, but also an artistic process. One of the key things that's unique to Frank Wildhorn's musicals is that the work on the album is as much an artistic evolution for the final, ultimate piece as are the workshops. And Frank can speak on rather than me presume, but he gets a chance to work. Some of the actors who are ultimately in the Broadway production have been with this show since the early demo sessions in the album, grew with it. But Frank and Jack had a chance to hear their music interpreted, had it orchestrated well before the first public performance. And the album and in other projects I've worked on can be an enormous creative tool, as important to the ultimate evolution of the show as a workshop. And Frank probably should speak on that, because it's what's new in the 90s, I think. It's as much a part of producing now as anything else.
We talked a little bit before about how the album is a business tool for the show and gets the music out there, but just as important is a creative tool, because for me at least, it's my first workshop. And it's the first time I get to be in the studio with artists, with my collaborators, and have the time away from the public, get to make mistakes, write songs, rewrite songs, reorchestrate. And a lot of the work that we do in the studio in making these records, because they are theatrical records, ends up being another workshop of the show. And it's a great tool to have.
Yeah. When you speak of workshops, you're a creative workshops, and that's what they did. You alluded to the typical workshop a while back. Often we know that we call them workshops, but they're really small backers auditions where we invite them in. That didn't seem to be, except at the very beginning, you didn't seem to, that wasn't your thrust. Yours was really a creative process.
The thrust was for us to see what we had there and to pick up on the enthusiasm from the audience. It wasn't a backers audition. We didn't sit up there and say, this is for you to put money into. But it was very, very beneficial.
We want to find out how you did get the money, so maybe we should...
Well, I got the money by going to high-rolling people. There's one of them right there.
And there's another right here.
There's another one right here. And between the two of us, we put up 2/3 of the money, and then we had investors in addition to that.
Well, I think maybe...
And the producers became part of the production, and they put in money.
Do you get money in advance for the CDs from the music publisher?
Yes.
How do you choose that? How does that come about? Is there somebody said the company will pay us more than that company, and we believe in them?
At the same time that we are making the relationships that we have with our producers, I bring the project to the record company, and I submit a budget for the first recordings, and they greenlight it, and that gave us the opportunity to do that.
Now Frank comes in and says, I just made a deal with the record label. We're going to have $1 million to do this thing. I said, forget the record. Tell them to bring $1 million over here. We'll do the show.
Well, I think we should understand now, how did someone had to decide that it needed 6, 8, 9, 10, whatever it costs to do it. And that, I presume, is your responsibility.
Well, in large part, in association with the whole producing team.
Sure.
We all counted on Gary. How much money do we have to capitalize this for? And we'd have to wait for him, and he's the best in the business.
Right. So what did you capitalize it at?
$7 million was the capitalization. And
did that include everything from the enhancement money?
Yes, that included ultimately the developmental package of activities that went on. It included, in retrospect, covering the early readings that were done as the development of the piece. It covered the enhancement monies that we paid to the alley for what happened there, and the attendant costs that we had related to enhancing the alley. Ourselves, flying down there, entering into transactions with people like Jerry Zaks to come in. And then it also included the normal costs of mounting the show from square one, which is what we did after the Alley production had concluded. It closed in November. We opened our out-of-town tryout in New Haven in February.
There was new scenery for New
Yes.
Haven? All new scenery?
Yeah, well, yes, physically, yes. Conceptually, it was very much the same. We discovered that the creative team initially assembled for the Alley hit what we felt were home runs in most departments. And so most of what we have on Broadway now is an evolution of original decisions made then. Conceptual changes were fewer than we expected they might be. I mean, we started with the music, and our mantra then was, don't get in the way of the music, let it speak. And we kind of flowed from there, and the music still does speak, and we're very proud of that.
Well, let's take the flow. You capitalized it at $7 million, and then and when you found you decided to go to New Haven, I guess again a joint decision amongst the producers and creators. Right. So you're in New Haven for 4 weeks. That can be a pricey operation because you're setting it up. You're taking it down, coming back in. Was it profitable to play? Financially profitable?
Financially profitable, not at all.
Yeah.
It probably added $750,000 to our overall expenditure to go there. But it was the best possible insurance policy to buy, is to see our final Broadway thing responded to by audiences. And the resonance of being in New Haven on stage at the Shubert with a creaking wooden floor. And just
one of those readings was the director of this Shubert Theater in New Haven. What was her name?
Carolyn Worth.
Carolyn Worth. And she absolutely went bananas. She called us, I've got to have this show, I've got to have this show for New Haven. It's going to be the first brand new, on and on and on and on. So we were thinking about going away quietly somewhere. And we did go to New Haven. We were very, very happy we did. But that's how those things, you start with the readings.
Did you find being in New Haven that you had too many people from New York coming and looking over your shoulders?
We were afraid of that, but I don't think it happened.
That's been often a concern.
I think it was very wise going out of town for that and having that run. Very important.
Oh, it was a very positive experience in every way.
Now, the Alley Theater taught us other things, too, before New Haven. When we played the Alley, we really were under the direction of Nick Corley. While Jerry was a production consultant, he was not the director. He, seeing it on its feet in Houston, opted to come on board as our full-blown director, and we're thrilled and proud, and we think that was integral. But along with him came a new lighting designer for Broadway. Along with him came a new costume designer for Broadway, and along with him came a new choreographer for Broadway. So while Gary tells you it was very much the same in Houston, the actual finished product on the stage at the St. James is different in very many ways.
Yeah.
Who made the choices for the choreographer and the other?
It was a collaborative effort, but certainly once you anoint a substantial director such as Mr. Zaks, those decisions are driven by him and approved by the authors and ultimately contracted by the producers.
And the Broadway house, did you have a concept of the kind of house it had to go into, or were you forced into what was available? Or
I think we were forced into the nicest theater on Broadway.
Turns out to be. I can say it turns out to be.
That was a real coup.
Right, it does turn out to
8
be.
shows backed up for the St. James Theater because of its capacity and its location, and we got that.
I think it's the ideal theater for your production.
It's beautiful.
Really,
It's a
the intimacy
wonderful.
of it,
Yes.
at the capacity.
I think that in
Great.
today's environment, being it's a supply and demand issue, and the demand is much greater than the supply for venues. And we, Pace Theatrical Group, has a strategic relationship with Jujamcyn, which owns 5 theaters on Broadway. So we were able to integrate the Jujamcyn organization into our process early. It was actually through them that we were introduced to Jerry Zaks, and they are actually a principal partner of ours in this production, and they made available to us their flagship venue, so we couldn't be happier.
No, you should be. I think it works wonderfully in the theater. Tell me, who decided, or have you decided, who is your audience? Who are you going to target now to see the show, apart from the normal Broadway people who will flock to it?
Right? From 8 to 80. I mean, there's the widest demographics that we could possibly
Enormous
have.
the demographics on this thing.
And,
we had school kids come in and they absolutely flip out over it.
And we have veterans groups that come.
Yeah.
You know, it's really...
But now, don't you have to take that into consideration if you're talking about marketing, which has become an important part of the show and the theater? You have to know who you're selling it to target that group. How do you decide on that? Roy's question.
Well, I think that we are blessed with a musical score that speaks to everybody. I think that the music is accessible to the mass general population that listens to the radio or buys CDs at the local music store on the corner. The music that Frank writes can comfortably be played on radio stations, whether they be country or pop or R&B today. So, you know, being that is the foundation of our show, it gives us a very broad opportunity. So, for example, if you're going to take one medium like radio commercials, which are, you know, traditionally used to help sell Broadway musicals, we have a score where we can comfortably play that commercial with excerpts from the score on various genres of radio stations, not just news talk, which is the traditional old school. We can be on top 40 radio stations, we can be on country radio stations, we can be on rhythm and blues radio stations, and have different musical excerpts for each segment of that group. We have a story that is, you know, of great interest to the general public. The Civil War is a broad interest, and what we've done is kind of focused it somewhat. We have a patriotic logo with the American flag intertwined. We have a television commercial, which we think is our primary tool, which I know you wanted to talk about, which speaks to all demographics. It's romantic, it's artful, it's beautiful, it's patriotic, it's anthem-like, it draws the audience. So I guess the simplest answer is, who is our audience? Our audience is everyone, and that gives us an opportunity to broadcast. Not to narrowcast, but to broadcast. And we can comfortably run a commercial, a television commercial, on the 11 o'clock news here in New York, which reaches a wide audience with a high rating and a broad demographic, and we know that our commercial message will speak to everybody watching. Whereas if you have a very special play or a very special musical that speaks to a smaller audience, you can fine-tune where that message goes. So,
does that come under advertising, marketing, publicity? Where do you draw the line?
The way we characterize things is marketing, and under marketing is paid advertising, trade advertising, promotions, publicity, public relations, school appearances are all under the auspices of marketing. Group sales, anything that drives the audience, I think, falls under that category.
Someone developed for me what you're doing with the schools, or what you intend to do with the schools, because that seems to be, it's wonderful, because if you get young people in the theater, it'll help the next 5 shows you're going to do. And this seems to be a perfect show to bring students to. What are you doing about getting the students interested in this, or what do you plan to do?
As Frank just said, it speaks to people 88 to 80. We didn't know that till we saw the show on its feet, and we really didn't know it till the 2nd or 3rd week of previews on Broadway. We didn't even know it in New Haven that 3rd graders can comfortably come in the theater and have as good a time as their parents. So having that knowledge is great, you know, and that gives us an opportunity to target even a wider academic audience. We are deeply in the evolution of a sophisticated study guide, one that speaks on the grade school level and on the high school level. That study guide will be published and will be available to teachers and so forth. We have aggressively sought out all the teachers to come in and see the show right away. You know, fortunately for us, we are close to the award season, including the Tony Awards, but unfortunately we're at the end of the school year. So whatever general enthusiasm we can get from the schools in the New York area, it's difficult to get them into the theater now because they're all winding down. But we're getting the educators in now to plan their groups for the fall. And we have a sophisticated education program. Norman, you want to talk about what Amy is doing for us? Or?
Yeah, it will also it'll be an integrated program so that there will be classroom resources for before and or after the performance, discussion points, launching essays, etc. In the theater, we will develop a full-blown program that will involve Q&A sessions with the various members of the company, be it production or or performance. And we may go, we're trying to go a step further and make that an interactive, so that there are, if students are interested in performance, we'll have a chance to interact with actors in simulated dramatic exercises, etc. And we'll bring them actually onto the stage. We'll have an electrician talk about what he does and do a demonstration of a very light or a cue. So we will focus these in a major session so that there's a wide wide view of what the various aspects are.
The American Theatre Wing, I think we're going to take advantage of what you're doing because it's a logical tie-in between our introduction to Broadway and our theater and schools programs. We do bring young people into Broadway shows, and it's a perfect show for them to come see.
Let's face it, the topic is taught from grade school through senior high school, American history, so we have that advantage to our...
Well, you've just given us the opportunity to ask you to bring some of your people into the public schools that we...
We'd love to.
And we'll do that. Because we found that nothing is better than develop an audience. But nothing's better than to develop an audience by having not just performers, but directors and casting directors and the like. Which gets me to a question. How did you cast this show? Way back. You don't have any stars in the show. You just have a terrifically balanced company. And how did that come about?
That was a big challenge in this show because we didn't want the people to appear as if they were acting. It was about being real. You sing those words that you sing because those are the only words you can sing. And so therefore we really reached out. And this cast is made up of people that we auditioned in Austin, Texas, and Alabama, LA, Chicago, Nashville, as well as the New York theater community. And as a matter of fact, one of the things I think that I'm most proud of at this show is we have some people on this stage that are entertaining audiences that had never gone to a Broadway show, and now they're in a Broadway show.
Well, I think that's good. How many in the company?
25?
26.
26.
How large
He
is
knows
the
he
cast?
pays them.
26.
26.
The one universal answer from the audience that's seen this is that they can't believe the casting. It's like there's 15 stars up there of the future, and most of them have never been on a Broadway stage before. And Frank that came about with Frank.
Well,
he's got such an ear for that.
Isabel, that's part of my whole thing. For instance, the orchestrator of Jekyll and Hyde, Scarlet Pimpernel, and Civil War, the musical directors of those shows, the casting of Civil War, so much of the music team and sound designers of all of those shows are all new people to theater. They were all people that, for whatever reason, went to other ways. They were in TV or they were in the movies, they were making records. And when my little theater journey started a few years ago, I really wanted to reach out and bring new talent into the theater. And I think we've taken that a step further with Civil War in the fact that so much of our cast is from places outside of the theater and now working in the theater.
Yeah. Besides the voices, there's a great freshness to it.
Yeah, well, I think that
and an authenticity, too, which
you know.
you don't hear, because if you're going to do a piece based on the Civil War and you have men of the South, to hear a country-tinged voice, unlike a Broadway-trained voice, which we have as well, brings a huge other level of resonance. It's so unique to the show, makes it so special.
This cast feels that it's more than just a job. We spoke to the company just last week after one of the performances, and part of the company meeting, I think it was Cheryl Freeman, who is our leading female, and she's an African-American woman, and she said, I think her quote was, it's my mission.
I've been chosen.
I've been chosen to do this show. And she feels that the message that the show has and the songs that she's been given to sing are more than just a job for her. And, we count our blessings to have the talent that we do up there.
I think it's very special now. You've got new people in the show who've never been in on Broadway. You're attracting new audiences. I think that maybe there's a pattern there that you can build on. New people in the theater and new people performing.
Well, if we don't do that, what's the future? We have to educate new audiences, we have to get them excited, and we have to speak to them in a musical language that they understand. And the musical language that they hear, whether it's my kids or whatever, is what they hear on the radio and TV. That's the popular music of the day. And I think if we speak to, especially young children, If Hootie and the Blowfish is singing a song that's based on the lyrics are based on a speech by Frederick Douglass. It's the song that will bring the kids in, and they'll listen to it because of who it is. And then along the way, they're going to learn something. And I think that's one of the neat things that's going on with this show, is the music brings them in, and it's accessible, and once they're there, they learn about a lot of important things about this country.
Well, I think what's important is if you're dealing with the schools, that the schools make this part of their education, so they don't think they're just out there listening to Hootie and the Blowfish,
right.
But that the teachers are able to tie it. And I think that your idea of the study programs is perfect for if you can really develop that. I wonder about how much of the show was driven by economics, though. In other words, how many decisions were made because of dollars, or did you really give Frank free hand and he'd just go ahead, or did you at any point have to rein him in and say, wait a minute, the break-even is going to be too high, or this cast is too high? How much
or
of it
even
was
the price
economic?
of the ticket? How do you, all of those?
Well, there are always limitations budget-wise, and I think as the project evolved through the winter after we had done the Alley production, the project started growing and growing, and as each designer weighed in, Jerry Zaks would find new great ideas, new toys physically in the physical production. And we did have one horrible weekend just before we went into rehearsals where I sat down with Wendy Orshan and Jeff Wilson, our general managers, and we did out in very fine detail the sum total of all the costs of all the decisions we had made over time. And I was forced to write a lengthy memo to the guys, our authors, and Jerry Zaks, simply saying that one by one the snowflakes have landed on this hillside, and we now have accounted for every penny of our $7 million with no reserve for preview losses and an insufficient reserve for post-opening advertising. And so we had a heart-wrenching weekend in which we slashed back many of the ideas that we had all at various times said, this would be good, let's try it, but Jerry, we're running out of money. Do you really need this one? Yes, we really need this one. And it all kind of accumulated. And on that weekend, we kind of reinvented the physical production of the show more than anything else, and removed some scenic effects, removed some...
We cut the submarine.
Cut the submarine.
Cavalry.
But we had initially had some fairly
Horses.
radically different ideas. The band was on stage. We had the band on stage, for instance, which we did have at the Alley, and it was an important musical concern for Frank, and I think it was the hardest compromise that Frank made that was purely driven by budget, was to bring them off of the stage and into the pit. It simplified the physical production in ways that saved hundreds of thousands of dollars ultimately. And so we did have that rugged meeting, but I think we tried to confine the process to always making rational decisions as we went. We pulled each other up short that one weekend and then went forward with it. And to the credit of this creative team and Jerry Zaks' leadership in particular, and Frank's, everybody just said, oops, okay, let's fix it. And they did all step in, and there were very tense and difficult days where the shops were about to start building X, Y, and Z, and we said, we got to redraft a bunch of this. So a lot of collaborative, creative people stepped up and really brought it forth in the way that it had to happen.
And that goes to another point that I think is very important, which is the collaboration with us and the producers. In my short career, the two constants have been Scott, Miles, and Gary and Pace, and Pierre and Mary over there. The Cassettes have been my producers, and we have now been through the wars together. So we can work a little bit in shorthand. We now have been there, so we know how that collaborative process not just works, but there's going to be times where you have to cut back here or do more here. And I think, you know, I know Jack feels the same way. We've been very lucky because Pace and Pierre are such great producers and so artist-friendly that on a day-to-day basis, some of these hard decisions, you don't get angst about them because you know everybody's aiming for the same mountaintop. You know the support is there. And when an artist feels that, you're very comfortable. And the most an artist can ask for is for his or her voice to be heard. And the fact that these gentlemen here really gave us the chance and continue to do that is very special. And it doesn't get talked about.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it's a two-way street, though. They wouldn't stick with you if it weren't that you were delivering exactly what they're looking for. I think that what I attribute to all of you is that you have remained together and you are repeating. I don't know how many shows that you bring in where the people are not talking to one another by opening night, and you have to separate them at the opening night party. Different.
Well, we've had 2 shows together from Dead Scratch. The Pimpernel was really from Dead Scratch, and we have a great working relationship.
Have you gone beyond your capitalization? Is our first show to earn back the excess? Did we ask Pierre to write more checks beyond the $7 million?
Well, we haven't had to yet.
Well, I think that speaks then very, very well for management as well.
However, Gary did say he wanted to see us after the show.
We have some thoughts.
When you mentioned that it saved you hundreds of thousands of dollars between having the band on stage or the orchestra in the pit, and where did that saving come in? What was the
What sorts of things did we cut?
No, she meant explain the difference in the cost of the band on stage as opposed to in the pit.
Actually, it was multiple things. We had a platform that was going to be on the top of the columns that constitute our set, and the band was going to be up there. The simple cost of creating it was moderate. It was maybe $25,000 to build that bridge. But then all the ancillary things of the extra days it would take us in New Haven to put that bridge up there, and the extra trucking to haul it back to New York. The fact that once we had this platform there, we obstructed the lighting positions for a good chunk of the upstage section, created new lighting demands that Paul Gallo had to get, possibly even additional follow spot operators to get a throw into there, and at the very least to have some trusses and additional Verilights that just add to bulk and money and additional stage crew as well to operate. It also, we knew, was going to create sound problems that were going to require some elaborate baffling, because the live sound was now going to be generated right near the proscenium arch and go up into the flies. And so a ceiling and a different form of sound system was going to have to be created, and that ceiling was going to draw in the smoke and fog that we use in the show and compress it around the band, and so we had a ventilation system. And so welcome to the theater.
That was a great letter he wrote, and this is just a small part of it. It went on and on and on. But after everyone read that thing from a professional point of view, they said, this guy was really right on. And the artists and the players and the creators and everybody.
Well, Gary, you're lucky
that doesn't mean you're getting more money.
I think that's what's so important in the theater, is to have people that know every part of theater.
And you're lucky they listen to you. I mean, it's so often that you can say these things, and you've got different kinds of producers who say, but
well, that's the miracle. This show was such a happy experience. I mean, from Frank and Jerry through the rest of the company, it was a collaboration with a common goal. And fiscal responsibility
but you're also knowledgeable
was a goal.
too.
But that's the way they all start out.
You bring that knowledge to each other.
Well, when you get to produce a Broadway show, you get to hire the very best people at what they do. And when you're smart and lucky, and you get people who are collaborators and will speak openly and freely and say, well, this will hurt my sound design, but it'll help the show look better, it'll help this, it'll help that. Will you pitch in and help me with the sound issues? Well, sure. With a dialogue like that, everybody can just not defend their territory, but put on the best show they can. It's a good thing.
Scott, I want you to address further with your marketing expertise. We all know that you've outlived on Jekyll and Hyde, you've outlived the 4 shows that were nominated for Tonys, and you're thriving there. And with all respect to the creators, I think that the marketing certainly is responsible a great deal for that. And obviously, you've now gotten some sort of formula.
Well, if there was a real formula, there'd be a lot more people doing what we do and a lot wealthier people involved in this business. I don't think there's a formula that can be followed for every show. I think that we've, the way it evolved on Jekyll and Hyde, quite frankly, was basically Gary and myself and Frank and Frank's collaborators on Jekyll and Hyde standing in the back of the theater every night, seeing the audiences go absolutely crazy, irrespective of what the critics said or what the Tony Awards said. We saw the audiences really, really going for the show. So we rolled up our sleeves and, as you said before, wrote some checks and built a marketing campaign to address the needs of that show. And the needs of that show were maybe not necessarily the what we commonly refer to as the Manhattan theater-going intelligentsia, but in fact the suburban audience and the tourist audience and the bridge and tunnel crowd, which is another common used term in our industry. And we aggressively produced and promoted our marketing materials into those areas. We're in every tourist publication. We're in all the suburban newspapers for a show like Jekyll and Hyde. And what we thought we would do is we would collaborate with our ad agency, and basically we asked them to come to the table and create for us a television tool, just like Civil War ended up doing, to reach the masses. Not the Manhattan intelligentsia, but the people at home on the weekends who come to the theater 2 or 3 times a year maximum, not 10 times a year, maybe only once a year, and reach those people in New Jersey and in Westchester and on Long Island and in Philadelphia. And we asked them to take basically all the Jekyll and Hyde films that were ever made, go to the video store, buy the videos, and edit together a storyboard for us of basically the scenes from our show, loosely based on our show, that we could see a video storyboard. We could see the impact of what it would look like on television when we took the film cameras into our theater. And they built for us a storyboard that we thought was dynamic and interesting, using Frank's score as the base. And like I said, we rolled up our sleeves and dipped into our pockets and produced a commercial that has been on the air now for over 2 years, and I don't think people are tired of it yet. It works. We put it on the air, and people buy tickets. We have not advertised in the New York Times for Jekyll and Hyde for 20 months. We haven't run an ad in the Times because that's not our audience for that particular show. That's not the same formula for every show.
Well, how do you relate that to the Civil War now? Do you have your
Well,
plan?
the Civil War is still a baby. You know, it's still growing. We need a foundation, I think, of you know, a few hundred, you know, at least 100,000 more people need to come through our doors before there is the critical mass to build the word of mouth, which is the most important advertising tool. And so we're still feeling our way. We see the same thing we saw at Jekyll and Hyde, and I'm sure the same thing Pierre saw at Pimpernel, is we see audiences really loving this show. We have a difficult title. We've talked about it repeatedly. The show has the word war in the title, which is a turnoff to women, which is a turnoff considering what's going on in the world today, in Kosovo, or you know, that's not something that you're drawn to, you know, from an entertainment point of view. Like Jekyll and Hyde is going to be gothic and romantic and entertaining. Scarlet Pimpernel is swashbuckling fun. The Civil War can be academic, you know, or it could be like spinach, you know.
The Perception.
The Perception, yeah, that it's, you know, really good for you.
I will attest that it's not.
Well, you know, I'm happy to hear that. You know, I think Cameron McIntosh made a strategic decision when he titled his show Miss Saigon instead of the Vietnam War. So we took on a very broad subject, and by having that title, which we think...
But it's a very recognizable title.
It's a recognizable
as well.
title, but it doesn't instantly connotate something that you would think is musically entertaining.
We were going to call it For the Glory, and we went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And we'd already made Frank had already made the Warner Brothers albums deals that was Civil War. So, but anyway, the marketing happens up on the stage. Now, we've had a slow start with this. We've had a couple of not good reviews. We've had some excellent reviews. But I am personally convinced that this show, 5 years from now, will be on Broadway, that this will become a sort of an icon, something fresh. The critics don't seem to quite be tuned into what we're trying to do. We never set out to do, you know, Oklahoma. We set out to do something that's very, very different, very, very special, and it takes a lot of nursing to get people caught up with, you know, and the people just absolutely roar over this.
How do you do that nursing? How much money do you have to put in?
Well, you nurse it. We nurse it every day by word of mouth, and.
But until you have the time for word of mouth.
Well, we're going to do that. If it requires more money, we're going to put it in. We have a very, very, very strong belief in this show.
Well, I'll give you the basic ballpark. I know you're looking for some numbers.
You're looking for some numbers.
You know,
Go
so
ahead,
I'll
tell
tell
us
you the numbers. When Gary did his budget for the show, we plugged in a number of roughly $1,500,000 for the advertising, promotion, marketing of the show, from the initial ad to put the show on sale, basically through the Tony Awards, roughly, through the first week of June. And that budget has been aggressively adhered to, which is a large sum of money. When you're talking about a $7 million budget, you're talking about 20% of the budget being not on that stage. You're talking about 20% of the budget being in the air, or on the and broadcast, or in wrapping fish, things like that. So what we've done is we've aggressively used that budget. We've created the TV spot earlier than most musicals may. Some musicals, the formula would be wait till you're a hit before you go, and you spend 6 figures creating a television commercial and then airing it. That's not what we did. We went in basically in our second week of previews and filmed a television commercial at a movie studio with our actors and certainly with our set, but we moved it to a movie studio, and it's on the air now. Again, most shows would wait and see if they were established and look at the reviews and look at the notices, and that's not Pace's formula, and I don't think that's Pierre's formula.
No,
our formula is to get out there and rely on no one but ourselves and the material on the stage, and that's what we're doing, and we feel good about it. You do get caught up in the race for the awards, and you have to be very careful not to overspend, or to market heavily to a very small audience. We're broadcasting. We're trying to build an audience. So that's where our money is going.
Are you going out of town? I mean, certainly this is a show for people from out of town to come in. This is the time of year they're beginning to come to New York.
Sure.
Are you marketing out of town already?
Well, absolutely. We're in all the airline magazines. The show is going to be going on tour next year. It has been announced on subscription in all those cities already, so they're already very aware of the show. We have a network of theaters that congregate annually at our conference. We have a conference each year, and for the last 2 years, we've showcased Civil War. The presenters around the country know about it. The patrons, the theater patrons, have been receiving subscription material, so they know about the show. We have made a deal with Comcast, and we are doing a hour-long documentary that will be airing on June 13th on the making of our musical. On opening night, It's national, not just in the tri-state area, but nationally. On opening night, we had a live simulcast on a company called TV on the Web, and for the entire evening, we were simulcast on the internet. 60 Minutes has been following Frank around for the last
6 weeks.
6 weeks, and I think many more million people than we could ever buy an ad will see the feature that runs on the creation of this show. They flew with our creative team to Gettysburg and walked battlefields with our composer and our authors about the creation of this show.
When you go into Broadway, do you already see your national tour in place? Has that taken into consideration right from the very beginning of what will tour and how you can tour it?
Well, for us, clearly the answer is yes.
Bear in mind that
For me, always yes, because what has to be fed out there are these regional theaters, which is a big, big, huge business. And it's like a whale eating plankton. They need product. And they don't get a lot of that out of New York, because you have to do family shows. Every show I've done, Will Rogers Follies is family, Pimpernel is family, this is family. You can bring your kids, your grandmother, whoever, and that is what will breed huge success in theater. If you have something that's so critically dynamic here, it might be something that'll never get on the road because it's too cutting edge or whatever. So we kind of concentrate on, and you forgot to mention that in the Newsweek magazine, 2 different issues, we have a full-page ad in the national Newsweek for Civil War.
And we're also following up with Time and People nationally.
But he's
How
being
profitable is a tour going on the road?
Profitable?
You don't go out, and you don't, let me explain that, he may be modest. You won't take the tour out unless you know that it's going to be profitable. That's the way they're structured today. And Pace, having most of the venues, has great control over that.
Yeah.
There are more theaters every week. The gross on the road is in excess of the gross on Broadway. Sometimes there's a narrow sight of things, but the real sales are around the country, not just on Broadway. It used to be, till Pace got very active in this, used to be, correct me if I'm wrong, that people waited until it was a success on Broadway and then sent out around the country. Now they found out that...
Jekyll and Hyde toured before Broadway.
Right, exactly.
So it's absolutely a business that is contemplated simultaneously.
Yeah.
In fact, there are some set pieces that were in New Haven that are part of the touring set, which will go out in January.
If it doesn't have that kind of touring potential, there's no point in doing it. You'll never make money on Broadway unless it's some kind of fantastic hit.
You want to go back to why you don't make money on Broadway?
Well, because the cost of doing the shows is so excessive, in some cases $10 and $12 million, and the arithmetic of capacity, 8 shows a week, and you fill all of those seats, it still takes you an awful long time to ever recoup your money. The money is all out on the road. On the road, when you said you're guaranteed, Pace, who owns theaters, they have subscription houses all over the United States. So you'll get let's say your show is $275. They'll guarantee you $300,000. So right away you're not going to lose. But you're all in there at 60% and 70% and so on and so on. And you get into these big houses, you know, you can make $1 million a week. You can't do that in Broadway. And you can keep repeating it over a 2 and 3 and 4 year period of touring. And that's before you go to Europe. So all the money's out there. And that's why.
Yeah, I think you're going to have everybody rushing into the theater being producers when you tell them they can make $1 million a week.
Well, they can. They can. I've been through that. I mean, Will Rogers Follies won what, 7 Tony Awards for the best musical and all that, and we broke even after sitting here for 2.5 years. Went out on the road, and we did make $1 million a week in certain places on the road. So I speak firsthand from that. Firsthand.
I think Jekyll and Hyde is even bigger. Jekyll and Hyde, of course, had paid off by the time it got to Broadway, and is still running.
And the biggest one on the road is going to be the Civil War. Yes. I'll put it against any show on Broadway when that thing goes out on the road, because that's a people's show.
Can you take advantage of of your personal following? The Jeckies, are there going to be civvies, or are there going to be something?
There are civvies, and one of the things we have learned very early on in the Civil War, like Jekyll and Hyde and Scarlet Pimpernel, we have an enormous amount of repeat business. We've only been running a little while, and you know, I'm back there and I talk to the people a lot at night, and it's very often, this is my 6th time, this is my 7th time, and you know, with Jekyll and Hyde, we have people have seen it over 100 times. That's the truth.
We had it in New Haven. In 3 playing weeks in New Haven, we had people coming back closing weekends saying, it's my 4th time, I brought my mother this time. It's amazing the passion his music engenders.
I got to tell you, though, because I think Scott is being a little modest here. Intellectually, I mean, he's the best at this stuff. I always call him the Michael Jordan of marketing. But I think what makes Scott unique in marketing is not just all the intellectual knowledge, it's the feel for the people. He has that finger on the pulse of the people, and he knows how to communicate with them. We're in the communications business, and one of the things that Pierre's whole career has been communicating to a mass amount of people. And these guys know that, and I think some of that is visceral, not just intellectual.
Well, I think that bring it to a point. How did everybody get to where they are now? If I'm not mistaken, you had your roots in the circus, did you not? Early on?
Hey, here's some peanuts.
You know too much, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Used to wear big shoes.
Yeah, I started in the. I went right out of graduate school to Ringling Brothers, and I was in the marketing department there for a few years before I joined Pace. So yeah, I got my roots. My roots were in driving the family audience. We were actively on the sides of milk cartons And we were doing coloring contests and all kinds of things. And I learned a lot, I really did. I think we apply so many of those tools that I learned early on to promoting and marketing Broadway, both on the road and here in New York. And a lot of what we do now is looked at as not being so radical or different. It's now becoming more and more commonplace to promote and market the way we do. Like I said, the New York Times isn't even a tool that we use at all for a show like Jekyll and Hyde. I would use it for the Civil War. I mean, each property is looked at differently. But the thing is that marketing of a show really is not formulaic. It is, Jekyll and Hyde has been running now in excess of 2 years on Broadway, and the tour that preceded it. There isn't, we have a marketing meeting that's attended by 12 people every week since 6 months before it opened on Broadway. And no one misses that meeting. And we talk about the media buys and the promotions and the in-store displays and the appearances that we're going to make. We had a Civil War marketing meeting yesterday. How many people were in the room?
18,
20 people. The record company is in the room. Our grassroots marketing people are in the room. The ad agencies in the room. The composers in the room. The producers are in the room. And we discuss and
Is that typical of shows today?
It's typical of the way we produce shows. Yeah. I think that many producers rely 100% on their ad agent and give them very little direction other than a budget. But I think that in order to treat this as a business, if you don't keep your finger, as you say, on the pulse of the people and evolve and see, well, this marketing tool is working and this one isn't working, so let's put more money in behind this, or we have a soft weekend coming up July 4th and we must do a promotion. If you ever stop doing that, you're going to wake up one day and you're going to start losing money. And once you sort of get on that negative track, there's no turning it around.
When you have 18 or 20 people in a room and they're all throwing out ideas, somebody has to decide what we're going to do and what we're not going to do. And usually the committee doesn't work. How does it?
Well, they may think they're on a committee.
Promotes that idea.
No, we have an agenda, and we go through the agenda, and ultimately, at least from the marketing point of view on the shows we do, I make the decision. But everybody gets their turn at the pedestal to put their point forward.
Let me pick up what I started with you. Jack, how did everybody get to where they are? Now, Jack, give us something about your background. Everybody now knows you're a lyricist, a composer, a creator.
Professional bowler.
That's right, yes, with a very high score. Actually, I lived in Los Angeles for 13 years. I grew up in New York, lived in Los Angeles 13 years, came back here in '91, had about 1,000 lunches with people, oh, you should see this guy, you should see this guy, you should see. And somebody mentioned to me, you should meet with this composer, he's looking for lyricists. Just don't tell him you write music. I said, okay. So we went to lunch, and he was my 1,000th lunch, and he said...
Chinese.
Chinese, that's right. It was good, too.
Who bought the lunch?
Actually, he bought
Eventually you did.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And he gave me 4 songs, a tape of 4 songs. He said, try these songs. And I wrote them in a week. I don't know how good they are, I don't know how bad they are. 2 of them made it to a record. So he brought it back, and I think he said, oh, good, this guy can keep up. All right. So we just had a good working relationship. We seemed to, it seemed to be... you know what it was? It was I could be bad in front of him right away. I think unless you can be, you're not afraid to be bad with your collaborator, you'll never be good. I mean, you have to be able to sit there and say this line, and as it's coming out of your mouth, say, this is the stupidest line anyone has ever said, but you say it anyway, and then you realize it and say, no, that won't work. So, and I think that we had that, if I'm not mistaken, I think that we have that ability to be able to just be free and just, do what you can do. And so he brought me on board with this project, and I met all of these wonderful people. And this is my first time on Broadway, and the thing that I have found, I've done theater things, little regional things and so on, and that's always a very collegial sort of undertaking, usually. Broadway, I've heard these horror stories, just horror stories. they're true, but no, actually they're
all
not
true. Read them.
Well, no, the thing that I learned about it is that it's a lot like what they used to say about Congress. It's the art of the possible. You know, you have X amount of dollars, you have this, you have that, you have that, and if everybody's working towards the same thing, that's a good thing. When everybody has their own private agendas, that's how shows get torpedoed, I think, because everybody's trying. You know, they have this sort of very parochial view of the show as opposed to the show, and I think I've been blessed with all of the people here.
I've never heard a group together, everybody, a love fest, this far into a production. I think it's a tribute to all of you.
Well, he has incriminating photos on it.
Well, not only that, but Scott wrote the music and I did the lyrics. These guys
Little
can say
known
anything
fact.
they want.
Terry actually directed it.
Yeah, Terry's our director.
Tell us, how did you get, Frank Wildhorn just didn't arrive tell us what happened and how did you get to be able to get on Broadway 3 shows ago?
Wow. It's amazing because, 3.5 short years ago, I guess, so many of these doors were closed and they were shut tight to me. And I'm not doing anything different than I did before. I was born in Harlem, I grew up in New York and then Florida, and then I lived out in Los Angeles. In the 80s, I was a writer, a composer of pop music from Whitney Houston to Molly Hatchet, but my love was always in theater. And the old actor John Houseman was the artistic director of USC when I was at USC. And when I was there, he said to me, go for it. You have something and you should go for it. And bring popular music to the theater, he would always say, do that. That's a good thing. Keep doing that. And even when he passed away, that was always something that stayed with me. And, it's surrounding yourself with the best people you can, making a home for yourself, which these gentlemen have done for me, not taking no for an answer, following your heart, being true to yourself, and you look at the people and you see the way the people respond to the music, and that gives you the strength, and you go on. Jekyll and Hyde was 17 years of my life. From the time I thought up Jekyll and Hyde to we got here. Scarlet Pimpernel was a 7 or 8 year journey, and this has been a 3-4 year journey. So hopefully, then
Overnight.
Yeah. So but it's funny because all of a sudden there's all this stuff.
Wait, did you have anything less than success before?
Jekyll and Hyde was my first experience in the theater. And it was a bunch of kids who had no idea what we were doing, but we just went for it and look at it.
Let's hope you stay at 100%. That's great. Now, Gary, I know you've had, people would deny it, but you have had 30 years of experience on Broadway. If someone wanted to do what you're doing, if they were wise enough or foolish enough, what would you tell them to do? If they wanted to become the executive producer of a Broadway operation.
Just dig on in, I think. For me, the path was to come up through initially working in a box office off Broadway, but then company managing and then working in general management, which got me the perspective from the inside of the business, which ultimately for commercial theater, that's where you have to live and breathe, is inside the business. The great opportunity for me was that my first job essentially was on Godspell as apprentice company manager. And I learned my craft through the 12 simultaneous productions we had going of that. And I worked for free that first summer because they were putting it together on a shoestring. And instead of the $40 a week I could have had that summer, they gave me a point of the show. So in 3 years, I had this great beach house. Anyway, I think there's an aspect of producing that is quintessentially management, and I think that's an imperative thing. I spent 17 years with Marvin Krause Associates. Marvin produced and general managed throughout the 70s and 80s, and is still active now, but we were one of the really active offices then, and I had wonderful daily contact with Michael Bennett and Bob Fosse and so many of the strong, great people, Arthur Lawrence and Jerry Herman. And getting to work on shows like Dreamgirls and La Cage aux Folles, the passion that I have for just loving musical theater and loving seeing a musical show, to stand in the back of a house, starting from Godspell and forward, even as a manager who had no creative input whatsoever, to know that I had been part of an experience that makes an audience go nuts and go out of the theater with the adrenaline rushing is just the greatest high. And it's transcendently so when it's a show like The Civil War, where I stand there as a fan. I love the show, and I stand there and have a great time. So I know Martha Graham said to people about going into dance, if a young person would say, should I become a dancer? She said, absolutely not. If you can even form the question in your mind, you haven't got it. You're not trapped enough in that decision. You have to have it.
I think one of the things that you brought out earlier is that you have a knowledge of all the aspects of the business. It isn't that you just know numbers, that you have to know something about the technical aspects. You have to know something about performance. I think that sensitivity that you can bring to production is probably why you are where you are today, that you have an overall view.
And a great collaborator with the artists. Right. Gary's the one who we work with on a day-to-day about the show. And he is such a great guy that you want to hang out with him. And that's, again, that makes you feel very comfortable. It makes you want to work harder.
I think this eventually translates to the stage. It really does. All right, Norman, your history, I know a little bit about your background and a couple other venues.
A lot of the gentlemen over here, Gary actually was someone, you ask about how to get into the theater, and when I was still in college, I had naivete can go a long way. Don't be afraid to knock on doors, and one of the people I wrote to was Marvin Krause, and Gary met me and answered some questions for me, and whether to pursue graduate education, etc. But it's just finding an opportunity and going out to do it. I began my career in Baltimore, which was one of the major pre-Broadway theaters. So I had, early on in my career, the opportunity to work on many shows prior to Broadway and meet a lot of the people who ultimately I would form professional relationships with. But I started out there when I was a teenager as an usher, so I got bitten by the bug there. And I think in my career, I've been on both sides of the footlights. I've worked in presenting organizations, in-house. I've been with producers as a publicist. I've toured. I've been on Broadway. I've been in other countries. And so I have a fairly good perspective, I think, on various aspects. So now it keeps me in good stead on something like Civil War, because I can listen to the Pace presenters and sympathize with the marketing director in Cleveland when they need materials, and know when I was on that end of the phone, if I had a recalcitrant press agent who didn't cooperate, how I didn't like it, and I have an obligation now to assist. And I see myself as a facilitator, whether it's with the journalist, as a publicist. I don't see it as an antagonistic relationship. I'm an ally, not an adversary. I'm there to help them to storyboard a story if it's a TV station, to help a journalist hone into what he or she wants. But I'm ultimately there to serve the producer too. And I'm there to give, make sure that Frank's work is seen and heard and appreciated by as many people. And it's very much a collaborative relationship.
What kind of receptivity are you having with the media now in placing people on behalf of the Civil War?
It's a
crunch time for a lot of
It's a crunch
shows.
time, but it's a gradual cultivation of persistence. One thing, in terms of my mentoring, around the same time I met Gary, way back when, I remember meeting Jerry Schoenfeld, and it was around the time Michael Bennett was producing, was writing Ballroom, and he said words that actually I still remember. It was like persistence and tenacity pay off, just don't be a pain in the ass. And, and in this job, no, or I don't know, or I'll get back to you is what you hear before yes. And I mean, to work with something like the New York Times, to finally get a profile, not so much of Frank Wildhorn and who he is and what he is, but his music, to hear that was about 4 or 5 months of constant phoning, writing, cultivation, slowly working with their apprehensions, working through step by step. And things take an awful lot of time, but you do have to be persistent.
There is a route to getting to yes.
It's a long road, sometimes.
Pierre, now we're not going to have you recite your whole career here, because we don't have that much time.
No equal time.
But I think, what I think it would be great to hear from you is the difference between all the television shows that you've done and now the excitement I know very well that that is generated from Broadway.
Well, I had done just about everything. I was an agent with MCA, and then I started a record label from dead scratch that became a big major record label, and I sold that. Then I went into television. I went to the Record Academy and started the Grammy Awards in 1971, and I've been doing, next year's my 30th anniversary. So I've been in a lot of parts. I did 6 weekly series and all kinds of things, but the thing I always really wanted to do was to get to Broadway. And at that time, in 1991 or 92, whenever it was, all of the big hits were from London. And I said, there's an opportunity here to fight that British invasion. And that's where the Will Rogers idea came from. And I went bouncing around looking for his family, and I made a deal with all of the living kids. And there we were, and it was very, very successful. So I got the next one I tried, I couldn't get off the ground, the Hank Williams story, because down there in Nashville, they said, well, don't worry about good old Hank. We don't want to sign no contract. You don't have to worry about us. You just shake hands, what we do, you know. And I go to all this trouble with the script. I couldn't get that done. Now, into my life, there were several ideas that came. Once you produce, you're a Tony Award-winning Broadway producer, you get a lot of ideas there. And when I saw this idea, I said, that is the idea. The Civil War and the Scarlet Pimpernel. And I just attacked that. And and I love Broadway. There's one thing about this business. If you're in television, if you're in motion pictures, and all of these things that I have done, there is one single entity that is much more exciting than all of them put together from a producer's point of view, and that is Broadway. You see what you get, you sing for your supper, it's all to be discovered. It could close the second night, it could be a hit for 15 years. It moves people from here to there, from sadness to happiness, or laughter to tears, or whatever. And you're there to see it happen. It's so disjointed in these other functions. You have one part of your crew's over here, another one's in Chicago, and then somebody comes together and they edit it all together, and it's a different business. Here, the joy of watching the collaborators. I mean, we've been to all these meetings, and the actors, and you see, when you're there opening night, you're just flying. You're just flying with the excitement, and it can work both ways. But at the same time, there's no business like it. It's the granddaddy of it all. Broadway is what?
I couldn't agree with you more. You know how I feel about live theater and being part of it. And I think that what you said has summed up that whole feeling of how the theater is different from any other entertainment medium. I'm so glad that it is, too. I have to stop this program right now because, once more, we do not have enough time to get all the information and get all the wonderful, wonderful knowledge that this panel has. This has been an American Theater Wing seminar on working in the theater, coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. The American Theater Wing is an organization whose year-round programs are dedicated to serving the theater and the community with the goal of developing new audiences. And to achieve that goal, we have created audience development programs for students, like Introduction to Broadway, which began 7 years ago, and has enabled more than 75,000 New York City high school students to attend a Broadway show, for many of them the very first time. And through our newest program, Theater in Schools, theater professionals like these in our seminar panels go directly into classrooms to work with and talk to students about working in the theater. In addition, we have our hospital program, which dates back to World War II, and our legendary stage door canteens. Today's version of the program utilizes talent from Broadway, off-Broadway, and the cabaret world to entertain patients in nursing homes, veterans hospitals, children's wards, and AIDS centers in the New York area, bringing the magic of theater to those who cannot get to the theater itself. We are proud of the work we do and happy for that wonderful working relationship we have with the theatrical community. And we are grateful to everyone who makes what the American Theater Wing does possible. I want to thank this wonderful panel, the production team of the exciting new Broadway show, The Civil War, that has given us so much of their time and knowledge this morning. And I want to thank Roy Somlyo, who is president of the American Theater Wing, for his very able, kind, and knowledgeable expertise in bringing out what it is to produce a Broadway show, absolutely from option to opening. Thank you very much for being here.